Folks, thank you so much. Welcome to the 4th UConn University Incubate North Mastermind session. Incubate North is UConn's first and only business incubator. This program surrounds UConn's most promising enterprises, which a few of them are online and a bunch are behind. This is the Incubate North space. As we work with them to execute on 12 to 18 month business growth plans via business coaching, strategic networking, and bespoke programming, including these masterminds. At previous masterminds, we've welcomed folks like Tosh Southwick, the co-founder of IRP Consulting, a local legend here, Vicki Saunders, CEO, Mike Nielsen, entrepreneur in residence at Intel, Ron Shapiro, American attorney, sports agent, author, negotiator, educator, speaker, and civic leader, and Wes Moore, who's a candidate for governor in the state of Maryland in the States, and hopefully, as you all have heard if you were part of that event, a future US president. And he actually wrote the foreword to Thibault's book, who I'll introduce in one quick session, in one quick minute, which all of our sponsors and program participants are going to get a copy of. I absolutely love these events. The Incubate North Masterminds are just one way that INE and our partners, Josh and Andy from Outfront, holistically support the businesses in the program and our community by making events like this public. We work daily with the mindset that it takes a village to scale a startup. And here, thanks to investments from TD Bank's Ready Commitment, Castle's Law, and our core funders, the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency, into Incubate North, we tap into our networks to offer participants and guests a unique perspectives from leaders with varying experiences, styles, and worldviews. Today, our team didn't have to look really far for this guest. I am really excited to introduce to you Incubate North participants, funders, sponsors, new friends, and guests, my brother, Thibault Manekin. I hope you've had the opportunity to watch the video that was embedded either in the invite or the Eventbrite link, formally introducing Thibault, which would give us a chance to really just dive into questions in the conversation quickly. We want this session, or Thibault in particular wants this session to ensure that we're really interactive and casual. I have 6 questions planned that are going to tap into some of my favorite stories that Thibault has, his experiences and advice, and I really invite you guys via the chat or coming off mute to kind of engage. And I'm just going to pull one thing up. There's a super funny story, but here's a copy. Here's Thibault's book. And as you can see, it's called Larger Than Yourself. UConn's motto is larger than life. And for the 4 years that Thibault's been putting this book together, I keep calling it Larger Than Life. And he's like, for God's sakes, Laura, like, why are you calling my book that? You say larger than life, more than larger than yourself. So, brother, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and sharing with this group. It's really, really cool to be doing this with you.
It's amazing, Lauren. I am looking at us talking and I'm wondering if we're still 8 and 10 years old or we have to act like adults on this call. I'll let you set the tone. This is your group, but either way works. And guys, stoked to be with you guys. Lauren sent me an amazing Incubate North hoodie. And I had all intentions of wearing it today, but my day got a little turned around. And I didn't make it back to the house to pick it up. But I do have on the Saks boxer shorts. That's a UConn thing, right? Is it? Yes, and they are amazing. No. Oh, it's not? Oh, I thought it was.
It's international, bro. They're all over the place.
I thought mom keeps coming back from the UConn with them, so I figured it was a UConn thing.
That's hysterical. Thanks for talking about your boxer shorts, bro. That's awesome. Now they really know us.
Right.
So let's start, and you're obviously hearing the giggles. I'm not on mute, so because of the group behind me. So folks, we grew up in Baltimore, and Thibault was bothered by 2 major questions that I think a lot of us think about, and Thibault's been thinking about since he was a little kid, and he'll walk us into that, the details a little bit. But why are we as people so divided is one of Thibault's burning questions. And what can I as Thibault do to creatively help bridge that divide? After university, Thibault went to South Africa and started Peace Players. His professional career has been amazing, and the work he's done has been recognized by Mandela, the Dalai Lama, Obama, and others. And now that we look back, or I look back on my brother's career, he's really had a global impact. And I wonder, T, if you can start and just kind of share with the group, what was, or was there a defining moment that started you on the path that you're on?
Yeah. Thank you, Laura. And yes, there were actually two of them, right? And I remember them really vividly. So we grew up in Baltimore City, and the first was, I was about 10 years old, and we'd finished this amazing family dinner, and my parents took my three younger sisters, Lauren included, and put them to bed, and asked me if I wanted to stay up late and watch a movie with them. Lauren, I was probably like, making fun of you behind the scenes for having to go to bed. But the movie that they chose to share with me that night was a movie called Mississippi Burning. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with it. It takes place based on true stories in the Deep South during the Civil Rights Movement. And there's a scene about halfway through the movie where there's the mob of Ku Klux Klan has secretly gathered outside of this black church at night. And the church ceremony ends, and the parishioners make their way out, and they're attacked by this mob of the Ku Klux Klan. And it's a violent scene. There's lots of beating. And towards the end of the scene, there's this young boy who appears to be about my age, and he's sitting there kneeling, praying, tears in his eyes, just hoping that the whole thing is going to end, and it's not really happening. And this Ku Klux Klanman comes up and kicks the boy as hard as he possibly can. And at 10 years old, that's all I could take. I sprint out of the room. I run up to my room, and I bury my head under my pillow. And I'm crying, sobbing uncontrollably. And all I remember is my mom comes up, and she sits on the kind of the end of the bed, and she puts her hand on my back. She doesn't say anything. She just kind of holds space. And she allows me to feel whatever it is that I need to feel in that moment. And for me, it was the first time that I remember asking myself, why are we so divided as human beings? How is it possible that something as trivial as the color of our skin can lead to a moment like this that has continued to happen, and that obviously happened countless times before? And so this question began to grow inside of me as to why are we so divided? The second really pivotal, transformative moment happened around that same time. My memory is a little more vague, but my dad put us all in the family station wagon and said we were going to go participate in something really significant. And we drove about half an hour away and pulled up beside the road. There's hundreds of cars, and on the road, there are thousands of people. And he explains that we're there to participate in something called Hands Across America, which was a day where the country came together and tried to link hands with human beings from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast in an attempt to raise awareness and money for poverty. And I sat there holding hands in line with complete strangers for as far as I could see the right, as far as I could see the left, literally connected with millions of people. And it was the first time that I remember asking myself, what are the creative ways that we can bring people together? What is this powerful force that at one moment in time has brought millions of us together for one common cause? And so from that very young age, I had these two questions begin to burn in my heart around, why are we so divided, and what are the creative ways that we can bridge those divides? And as I grew up, as I went through middle school and high school and college, every year I saw more reasons why I needed to continue to ask those questions. And I saw that I was further away from actually finding the answers to them. And look, guys, like we have two choices in life, right? We can ask ourselves these questions and sit on the sidelines, hoping that somebody else is going to do the heavy lifting, hoping that somebody else is going to do the work. Or we can understand that the questions are relevant and that they're significant, and that we are not only going to find the answers to them, but we are going to be a part of the solution and not the problem. So, armed with those two questions as they continued to burn, that kind of paved the way for everything that I've done professionally from that moment on.
Awesome, Thibault, thank you. It's an awesome stage. So bring us now to South Africa, which is your first and one of the biggest kind of game-changing jobs in the story that I know of you. And I love this story, and it's in your book. It's one of the first things folks will read about. But bring us to South Africa and tell us the soccer story when you first showed up on the continent.
Right. So I graduate from college and have this decision making of what am I going to do to be in search of that answering those two questions. And with two friends, we started an international nonprofit called Peace Players. And the idea is that we would go to war-torn countries and we would use sports, in our case basketball, to work with young kids to bridge divides, develop leaders, and change perceptions. And look, guys, like you guys are all in the entrepreneur space. At 22 years old, we raised $8,000, which felt like $1 million at the time, right? And it was enough to get on an airplane to South Africa right after the fall of apartheid. And we show up and just like filled with passion. We're going to be testing this idea out. We're really excited about it. But that first week was crazy. Like everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. 10,000 miles away outside of our comfort zones. And it's just, we had a really complicated week. So we had to kind of clear our minds. And so we gotten in the little rental car that we had, and we drove to this amazing mountain range called the Drakensberg Mountains. We did this incredible hike early one morning, hiked to the top. There's this thing called there's a place called the amphitheater. You felt like you'd see the entire continent of Africa from there. Made our way back down after the hike, and there was still some daylight left. So we're driving back to Durban, the city we're from, in rural South Africa. Dirt roads, and we're driving through this one village, and off to the right below us is this massive field, like a huge plain. And on that field, there appears to be about 100 little Zulu kids. They're not really doing anything organized, they're just kind of lounging around. And the car is like inching to a stop. And my buddy Sean, who's in the car with me, like we take one look at each other once the car's fully pulled over the side of the road. We give each other a nod, and we hop out. And look, this is, I'd been in South Africa for a week before, and prior to showing up, I had spent a lot of time with South Africans before making my way to the country. And the number one thing that white South Africans told me was, whatever you do, if you end up in a rural area or a township, do not pull over to the side of the road. Do not stop. Do not get out of your car. It is dangerous. You will likely be killed. No one will ever see you again. There's incredible violence. Whatever you do, don't stop. And sure enough, here we were, cars somewhat stopped on its own, right? Sean and I have given each other the nod, and we're out of the car, pulled over on the side. We go to the back and we pull out the donated basketball that we brought with us everywhere that we went. And we get to the top of the hill that looks down into the plain below, and it's a really steep hill. And we start to make our way down the hill, but the hill is so steep that we're picking up speed as we're going. And I wish I could explain the reaction properly of the 100 little Zulu kids who are at the bottom of the hill. To them, what they see is two 6'1", 6'2" white guys charging down the hill right after apartheid, right? This, in their minds and their hearts, rightfully so, was a recipe for disaster. The little 3-year-olds, the youngest of the kids, start crying and sprinting as fast as their little legs will take them to the woods on the other side of the plain, or there must have been another village. And the older kids, the 13, 14, 15-year-olds, create this horseshoe at the bottom of the hill, puff up their chest and clench their fists and wait for us to get to the bottom. So we get to the bottom, and it's really clear that the intentions are completely different. We have come down to play a game. They think we've come down to fight. And so, and we don't speak a word of Zulu, and they didn't speak a word of English. So there was no way to use words and language to de-escalate the situation. So I kind of walk up to the closest kid to me in the semicircle, and I extend my right palm as if to try to get a high five, and all of the kids take this giant step back. And I realize that this isn't going to work either. So I go back to Sean, and we kind of goofily, I don't know if that's a word, goofily, in a goofy way, demonstrate the high five that we're going for, right? So the kids are trying not to smile, but you could see them start to crack the sides of their mouths. And I go back to the first kid, and all the other kids take a step back, but he stands kind of bravely. And I extend my hand, and he kind of looks around to see if he's got approval for the high five. And all of a sudden takes his hand back and as hard as he possibly can, slaps my hands, and the kids erupt in laughter, jumping up and down of excitement. I'm blowing on my hand in exaggerated pain because the high five was so hard. And then so the crowd goes silent because he extends his hand. And so now it's my turn, and obviously not as hard, but I give him a proper high five too. Guys, from that moment on, we didn't have enough hands. The 100 kids are there's a high five craze. Everyone wants a high five. The little 3-year-olds that were crying in the woods in the back have come back, crawled under the legs of their friends, and are trying to get a front row seat to the high five madness. It was amazing, right? It wears off after about 30 minutes, and we split up into 2 teams. Sean takes 50 of the kids with him on his team. I take 50 of the kids on my team. And the most epic game of soccer starts, right? The field is 600 meters long. There's no sidelines or boundaries whatsoever. Boulders and trees make up the goals, I think, right? So we're into the game. The sun is pretty much setting. We don't have a lot of daylight left. And I get this pass from this kid on my team. And I'm not any good at soccer, right, necessarily. I don't really know what to do. I just kind of like plant my foot and I kick the basketball as hard as I possibly can. And sure enough, it sails up and starts to curve, and it makes its way past the diving 8-year-old goalie through the 2 trees, and I've scored, right? So now I'm like really self-conscious. This is not my intent to score. And I feel like I have to do something. And I was at the airport the week before and I watched a soccer game on TV, and they do this thing called the airplane, right? So like I rip off my shirt and I start running in the opposite direction of the kids. And I'm kind of doing this thing in this airplane thing, and I hear something behind me. And as I'm airplaning, I turn around, and all 100 kids, the 50 kids from Sean's team and the 50 kids from my team, have taken off their shirt, are airplaning behind me, screaming, "Goal!" You know, I'm like, tears are just like streaming down my face. I'm 10,000 miles out of my comfort zone. I am in a place where most people told me I wouldn't survive, right? And in that moment, I realized that this idea of sports to unite was going to work. Again, here we are, 2 white guys from America, they don't speak any Zulu, and 100 little Zulu kids, that because a round ball traveled from one place to another place, created a memory that none of us will ever forget. And I appreciate Lauren asking me to tell this story because it's my favorite to tell, and I've told it hundreds of times around the world. The amazing thing is that I bet that all of those little kids have also told that story hundreds of times. And the impact that it had on them, and the impact that it had on me. And it really changed the complexion of the program. We got back in our cars after our goodbyes. We headed back to the city of Durban, amped up, knowing that failure wasn't an option. We had just seen how this was going to work in a way that none of us could have ever imagined. So we get back, and the program really starts to take off. All the schools want to participate. Kids are loving it. Coaches are coming out of the woodworks. And about, I don't know, 3 months into the program, that $8,000/ $1 million, which it felt like we're just about out of, and we get a call from Nelson Mandela. And he says, I'm a huge believer in the power of sports unite, and I want to become your organization's largest sponsor. And so we went from like not a lot of money to not a lot of credibility to Nelson Mandela's name and money behind us. And we're invited to replicate the model all over the world. In the Middle East with Israeli and Palestinian kids, in Northern Ireland with Protestant Catholic kids, in Cyprus and Yemen. Today, the program's worked in over 20 countries with over 100,000 kids. It's trained over 2,000 coaches, change agents, volunteers to carry on this really important work. And you'll hear this as a theme of mine throughout this conversation, but we were really clear that this idea of using sports to unite wasn't ours. We weren't showing up to countries like South Africa or the Middle East saying that we have the answers, the solutions to solve generations and centuries of hatreds and division. Our job was to show up and be quietly behind the scenes. We could dribble a basketball, we had knowledge of the game, but we were really clear that we were going to make sure that the coaches and the communities and the parents and the schools and the kids were the ones who were going to mold the program in the best way that would work for them in the moment of whatever they were experiencing within their country. So again, Laura, appreciate you asking about that story, and certainly has left a really incredible impact on me and all of the work that we continue to do.
I love that story, Thibault, and there's so many, and you know that, but there's so many pieces that folks in the Yukon are, anyone would relate to, but in particular about standing back and not owning ideas, but just acknowledging that they're larger than yourself or larger than ourselves. So I love that. And
larger than life.
You named your book wrong. So I recently saw a bumper sticker that said, "Did you die?" And the bumper sticker spoke to how I feel like I show up, Thibault, you show up in life. And a lot of the things that we talk about in our team, in our community, and with the Incubate North folks. And for me, it was like, hell yeah, for me, it speaks to being fear-facing, trying new things, leaning forward into failure, stepping out of your comfort zone, which you talk and write about in the book, and I'll ask you about. And even after those things, even after doing those scary things or those really big things, we most likely won't die. So the philosophy is that the bumper sticker, "Did you die for me?" is like, you're not going to die, just jump in and go do it. Can you tell us about, or Thibault, tell us about a moment in your life that served as a wake-up call that sitting on the sidelines just wasn't an option? And then can you weave into your story also some of the pieces around comfort zone for us?
Yes. So at the end of about 6 years of living out of a suitcase, hopping from country to country, helping to set up the program, I knew that it was time to come back to America. I knew that it was time to move on from Peace Players and try something new. Just felt it in my heart. And I boarded a plane from South Africa back to Washington, D.C. It's a 16-hour flight. I'd done it countless times. And I sat down, and if you sit down next to me on an airplane, you better be prepared for a long conversation, right? Like, I want to see your soul, right? You might actually ask to change seats at some point. But I was emotionally drained. I was scared. I was tired. I didn't know if I'd ever find anything as significant as the experience I just had with Peace Players. I didn't know what was going to be next. And so I just passed out on the window before the flight was fully loaded, before the plane took off. And I don't know, several hours into the flight, the seatbelt sign goes on, and I kind of wake up, and there's this young boy sitting down next to me. He appears to be about 12 years old. He's reading this big fat book. And I kind of wipe my eyes and wake up, and he sees me, and he closes his book, and we introduce ourselves. He tells me his name's Simon, and I introduce myself as Thibault, and we start this amazing conversation. And one of my favorite questions to ask people was, if I had a time capsule, this like fancy machine that you could get in and you could go back to any time period in the history of our universe, what time period would you go back to? And I've gotten the coolest answers over time. Some people want to go back to be cavemen. Some people want to go back to the medieval ages. Some people want to go back to the 60s. And I find my window, or I see my window, and I ask Simon that question. Simon, if you had a time capsule, what time period would you go back to? And as if Simon knew I was going to ask the question, he says, I would go back to the time period of Nazi Germany. And I was convinced that I heard him wrong. Nobody that I could ever imagine would want to use a time capsule to go back to that time period. And so I asked him to repeat himself. And he says, yeah, if I had a time capsule, I'd go back to the time period of Nazi Germany, because I would have had a chance of stopping Adolf Hitler. And so like that froze me in my tracks, right? Because I've always asked myself, if I had grown up in the time period of slavery in America, in a white family, as a young white boy, even if my family had believed in the institution of slavery, would I have had the mental strength and fortitude to stand up for what was right? And I always said, there's no such thing as a what if question, or I'll never be able to. So why waste my time and energy even wondering about it, right? I'd ask myself, having spent so much time in South Africa, if I'd grown up in a white family during the apartheid regime, would have I had the strength and fortitude to stand up for what was right? And again, I kept shaking it off, because there's no way that like I would have ever been able to go back in time. And what Simon helped me realize was the importance of the immediacy of the moment. 50 years from today, right? Two people are going to be sitting on an airplane ride, and one's going to turn to the other and ask that same stupid time capsule question. And that person is going to turn around to them and say, I would use your time capsule to go back to 2022, because I would have had a chance to stand up against global warming, the criminal education system that at least exists in our country, and I hope it doesn't exist in yours, to take a stance for the war in Ukraine and the atrocities that we're seeing there now. And Simon helped me realize that it was this idea of like, we can't sit on the sidelines hoping that somebody else is going to do the work, because other people might, but it's our responsibility to jump in and do the work and do the heavy lift. And even if it's messy, even if it's uncomfortable, even if we don't know what the answer or the solutions are going to be, at least we're in and participating. So, Laura, that was a really pivotal moment for me because it came at a time when I didn't know what was going to be next for me. But as I got prepared, as the plane really made its way back across the Atlantic, and I got set to embark on the next thing, Simon's comment, right, really taught me that as long as I remained in search and in honoring my purpose, those two burning questions, I'd find the next thing. But sitting on the sidelines just wasn't an option.
Thank you, T. Thank you. I'm skipping ahead because that's a really powerful story, and I want to get into other stories, but some of them, the next ones kind of lead to a little bit more entrepreneurial pieces. But the work of entrepreneurs and innovators, as you know, and obviously the folks that we play with day in and day out, whether it's their first big idea or their first idea or one that's grown and scaled into something huge and impactful, is filled with ups and downs, the life of an entrepreneur and an innovator. Often the grounding that we need can be found in our core values, and you obviously are developing them as the time is going on and the stories that you're bringing us through. And then the vision for that original idea, and again, the ones that you're growing. I've heard you talk a lot, and your book speaks about principles behind growing ideas and impactful ideas. Is there one that really sticks out that you could give us as a story or a tool that we can put in our back pockets to kind of illustrate the idea of principles behind growing ideas?
Yeah, there's so many, right? And I talk about kind of 7 principles throughout the book that help to grow small ideas into powerful and impactful movements. I don't think we have enough time to get into the one that I really like. So maybe I'll do kind of a couple. And it was part of your earlier question around comfort zones, right? So when I got back to America, my second day back in the country, I unexpectedly ended up in a part of Baltimore City that I had been made to believe my entire life that I wouldn't be safe in and I wouldn't be welcome in. And I had heard this narrative across the world really at that point, right? And I had seen the importance of not listening to it, of making sure that we're always jumping out of our bubbles and out of our comfort zones. And, that ability to do that allowed me to get out of my car and walk around this community that day. And in that walk, I had 2 really powerful realizations. The first one was that our country, the United States, and particularly my city of Baltimore, were more divided or are more divided than all these other so-called war-torn countries that I'd spent so much time and energy and resources in. We have an inability here to have open and honest conversations about our similarities and differences with people who don't look and feel like us. That is a fact. And I began to see that as a ticking time bomb. If something wasn't done to address it, it would really explode. And you guys have been following the news, and not only is it exploding, but it is continuing to explode at a massive, almost unsustainable level. The second realization that I had as I was walking around was that the real estate industry, the control and ownership of land, is the most powerful connected industry on the planet. But historically, it's done more to divide us than actually bring us together. And, my family had spent, our family, Laura, had spent a long time in real estate, and I never heard the other side of that language, right? The flip side of what the harm that real estate could actually do, and the control and ownership of land. And it got me thinking, so much so that, our dad, who I think spent some time with you guys as well, Thibault Manekin, him and I went out to dinner, and I was sharing with him this experience that I had walking around this part of West Baltimore that day, and my confusion about real estate and its role and not being really a tool for good. And the two of us challenged each other to start a company that would reimagine the real estate industry, right? That would use buildings to empower communities, unite cities, and help to launch really powerful ideas. So one of the principles in growing an idea is really reimagining industries, taking things the way the world has known one way and completely flipping them upside down, where we're leading with our purpose over our profit. And look, it's there's a really fine line, because while our purpose is absolutely key to the work that we're all doing, especially as social entrepreneurs, without running a profitable company, we will lose the tool that allows us to be in service of that purpose. And so the two have to somewhat go hand in hand. So look, I mean, there really are so many of the principles. I think the number one thing is to always make sure that we're getting out of our comfort zones. It's only then that we're able to see the other side, to walk in the shoes of others, to see and listen deeply to things that we would otherwise miss if we're not able to jump out of our bubbles. And then another one that I really believe is in shaking things up, right? Leading with that purpose over our profit, and really flipping industries upside down in order to do so.
Awesome. I'm going to skip one question, and it's about finding creative ways to get to the yes. Those of you who have worked with me know that I hate no. We tell our team, no, we can't do something. And I see the entrepreneurs that we work with day in and day out, and none of us like no's. But we can get to that, Thibault, but I want to do a couple of things. I want to ask you this one question, and I want to open it up for questions from folks. We have, thanks to Heather Dugan, a colleague of ours in the INE team, we have a giant gong outside of the incubator for folks to ring when there's a success that happens in their business, in their life, anywhere. And we find that people across the building now come and ring this beautiful, huge, resonating gong with successes, and it's super awesome. At the same time, we also have this pig, and this pig makes the worst sound in the world, right? It's an awful, awful sound. And the pig is for our failures. So in this culture in Incubate North, we are celebrating both of those. And when listening to you talk, and if you guys Google Thibault Manekin, you're going to read about amazing successes, but what you don't see as much are the failures. Thibault, can you tell us a faceplant story and walk us through your relationship with failure?
Yeah. So look, guys, I think it's really important that I don't think there's such thing as a failure. Right? They are these beautiful, teachable movements, right? They are all part of our journey. They are part of our collective life experiences that strengthen us as human beings. And we do use the term failure a lot as we try to kind of compare them to our successes, but we need to get out of the habit of that. I much prefer a face plan over a failure. And in that light, I have had many countless face plants, but I think the one that's really coming to me today is we're working on a project in Baltimore City. My dad and I had launched that company called Seawall to reimagine the real estate industry, and we've done a lot of really transformative projects in the city. Baltimore City tapped us to help to reimagine and transform our public market called Lexington Market. It's in a part of town that's fallen on total disinvestment. It's a shell of its former self. And probably the biggest honor of our professional careers to play some role in helping to breathe a new life back into it. We've been very clear from the beginning that it isn't a real estate project. It's the opportunity to prove that a single building brought to life in a really inclusive way can unite our city at one of its most divided times. And it's a really public-facing project. And so we spent the first year after I've been awarded the project just going from neighborhood to neighborhood, just listening. We'd have a kind of 5-minute presentation of what we understood the market to be. And then we would ask, what would it take for you all to fall in love with the market again? And we spent a year collecting a ton of data, helping to create like 3 main guiding North Star principles that would help inform all of the decisions that we were going to make, that kind of culminated into one massive town hall meeting for the entire city, where we were opening up the doors to anybody that wanted to come in and listen to all of the learning, the direction that we were going to set for the market moving forward, and just an awesome opportunity to listen even deeper and continue to be vulnerable. But it was such a public-facing project in a predominantly Black city of Baltimore, Our company is a predominantly white company, and there was this nervousness, particularly on my part, to be the face of the organization at that point, right? And we had hired this incredible African-American friend that was the kind of community liaison, and worked really closely with all of us and was doing most of the listening throughout the city. And he was going to be the MC for the evening. His name's Pickett, and has become a really kind of lifelong friend since then. We've done incredible stuff together. And so Pickett gets up stage and probably delivers the greatest genuine performance presentation around all of the listening we've done, what the market means to the city, and the inclusive nature in which it's going to get brought to life. And at the end of his presentation, there's a pause and there's a microphone in the front, and people are invited up to ask questions and give comments. And the first person comes up and grills into Pickett and gives him a hard time about Seawall exists to gentrify communities. Seawall is just going to turn this into an upscale food court. Seawall exists to displace poor people. And at the end of the Seawall process at Lexington Market, it's not going to look anything like what it used to, and won't be inviting to the community that's counted on it forever. None of those things could have been further from the truth, but she's asking Pickett all these questions about Seawall's past. And Pickett didn't have a single answer to any of her questions. He shouldn't have. He didn't have a decade worth of experience growing Seawall. He's fairly new within the last year to our company. And he was just kind of like doing his best to deflect the question, which also didn't look good. So the mood in the room with hundreds of people at this town hall changed dramatically, right? It went from like kind of like love and support to feeling like they were being tricked. And it almost got quite aggressive. And I remember watching Pickett up there, and the more Pickett took it to the chin, the further I retreated behind this massive column that was holding up a part of the building. And I just kind of almost hid there, hoping that the night would somehow end. And it did. Eventually Pickett had made his way through all the questions. Everybody went home. And I spent the whole night tossing and turning, literally incapable of sleeping. And for me, I saw Pickett in the office the next morning. I pulled him aside. I had tears in my eyes, and I gave him a huge hug, and I apologized. I said that I let him down, that I didn't have the strength to stand up in that moment and take those questions, because they were my questions to answer and not his. And had I been able to get that moment back, I would have got up there. I would have given Pickett a huge hug, thanked him for the incredible presentation, and one by one answered each one of the questions that was asked of us in the kind of the loving, open-hearted, caring way that I knew that they needed to be answered, but in a way that I didn't have the strength to do in that moment. And it was such a question. It was such a failed leadership opportunity. I've always believed in leading from behind and letting everybody else shine. It's been a little bit of the spirit of my journey. But the reality of it is, and what I learned in that moment from having missed that opportunity, is that as leaders, even as inclusive leaders, there are going to come times in projects and in the growth of ideas where we have to step up, where we have to take the heat, where we have to take the credit, or whatever it is, where we can't just hide behind columns and hope that the whole thing kind of dissipates, because that only makes things worse. And so, failure, the face plant, learning opportunity, all of the above, that was really one of the most significant kind of growing opportunities for me as a young leader, in having missed it and swearing that I would never let fear get in the way of my ability to step up and do what I knew was right in the moment.
We talk about authenticity on our team a lot, and in the program. And Thibault, thank you for showing up raw and real and really heart-centered on that story. Folks in the room or online, does anybody have any questions? I have a couple backup ones, and Thibault's a million stories, but does anybody want to come off of mute or type something in?
I have a bajillion questions. Thank you so much for sharing today, Thibault. You've got some amazing past history learnings and all the rest of it. I'm curious. I'm South African. My mom's South African. I'm born and raised.
I saw the Madiba comment there. Not everybody knows Mandela by Madiba. Well done.
What an honor. You must have felt just so amazingly inspired by that, especially at the young age you were. I'm curious, how come South Africa? Why did you decide to start your journey there? And what do you think, if you'd have chosen a different place to start, where do you think things would have gone for you?
So we ended up in South Africa. The buddy Sean, who we had that soccer game with those kids that day, he had gone over to play professional basketball in Northern Ireland after college. And while he was there, he started working with a group that was using basketball to bridge divides between the Catholic and the Protestant community. And he volunteered and he kind of coached there a little bit in between playing on the team there. And he became friends with one of the local police chiefs who had a friend in South Africa. And the police chief said, hey, if you really like this, South Africa would be an incredible place to try to replicate the model. And that's about the time that Sean and I hooked up, and, the universe had kind of pointed through a relationship to South Africa as the place where, where we would launch the Peace Players program. And, at that age, I mean, I was really early 20s, just naively driven by eternal optimism, right? And which would pretty much have showed up anywhere anybody told me to show up in that moment. And South Africa had to be a place. I did a book talk this morning to this group of CFOs, and somebody really asked me a question of, if you knew there was so much wrong with America and there was this incredible divide here, why didn't you start here? So Astrid, I think that would be the answer to the question, that I wouldn't have gotten on a plane. I wouldn't have even gotten on a bus or anything. I would have stayed right here in my city of Baltimore, that I think is one of the most divided cities on the planet. And we would have started the program here. It didn't happen that way. And the 5 or 6 years living around the world taught me priceless lessons that I might not have gotten had I stayed in the bubble and comfort zone of the city that I grew up in, even if it was in parts that I wasn't aware of. But I think of all of the countries, I think the United States needs this work the most.
Thanks, T. Alex, you want to jump in?
Sure. Similar to Astrid, I probably have four about 5 questions. Really, really interesting. I've had similar conversations with Cos, who runs Right to Play, and the importance of sports and play and letting kids play and using lessons through that. But my question relates to, in a world where not only mainstream media does not tell stories often about entrepreneurship or motivational stories, and even further, social media has created silos that people find themselves they're seeing everything through silos. So we're not actually seeing the other side. We're not experiencing getting news and media from other sources. How do we break out of that? How do we, as support organizations, help social enterprises, entrepreneurs break out of that and to tell their stories, not only to share motivational stories, but transformational stories?
So the question is, Alex, how do we help social enterprises tell their stories?
Yeah, and also reach people that are in different silos, given the fact that media has an agenda. And I talked to journalists both in Norway, Canada, elsewhere. Mainstream media isn't interested in these stories. So how do we actually reach the other side so you actually are lessening the divide that you're talking about?
So it's a great question, right? And I'm not a media guy. I'm fairly new to social media and I'm not very good at it. I think that the problem is that we're relying too much on media to begin with, right? The COVID pandemic has forced us even further into that reliance on media to get our news and information and what we do and don't believe. And it's been beautiful to get back out into the world without masks on these days, and to see people smile and cry and share emotion. But I think the answer, and I've seen this in every project that we've ever created, is that it hasn't been the media that's been the deciding factor in its success. It's been building an organizational groundswell where something becomes so important, supported by so many people, that there's no way it will fail, right? We did a project in Baltimore. It was the first real estate deal we did, where we created the country's first Center for Educational Excellence, which was discounted apartments for teachers and collaborative office space for anybody, for nonprofits focused on underpinning the success of the school system, all under one massive building, 100,000 square feet, discounted rents, great space, rolling out the red carpet for the people doing the most important work in our cities. We knew that it was a heartfelt, good story that like most media wouldn't pick up, right? We knew that the economics were stacked against us, that most people in the neighborhood that we wanted to do this in didn't think that it would succeed. So that in order for us to it's an example of getting these no's and these can'ts. In order to move past that, you have to build your idea from the inside out, right? Where everybody that the idea touches has the same sense of pride, of ownership and authorship in what's getting created. So we systematically started with the teachers and nonprofits, the end users who are going to be in our buildings, right? And we let them design every square inch of the buildings, choose their own rents, pick their own amenities, design the space with our architects in a way that would work for them and what their needs were financially and programmatically. We did the same thing with the community that these buildings were in. We came in and said, we are here to be neighbors and not guests, that these teachers and these nonprofits want to create something called the Center for Educational Excellence. They would love for it to be within your community. How does that sound and feel? What would you like to add or take away to make it even stronger than what they had dreamt of? And then we had surrounded ourselves with what we call a team, these guardian angels that have, failed more times than we will have ever succeed, even though they've had massive success. They've been there, they've done that. They're able to hold our hands and teach us things every step of the way. And what we found is that with like every person that we touched, with every person that we transferred ownership and authorship to, they transferred it to more people. And it got to the point that even though there was a $14 million gap in the financial model to bring it all together, the idea was too big to fail at that point. And the resources ended up miraculously making their way to it. And so we built and have built everything around that philosophy, is this kind of idea of like shared ownership and authorship, so that the groundswell that's created, the movement that's created, is unstoppable. And that's the beauty of movements. When enough people get behind them, there's nothing you can do to get in their way. And then look, Alex, the beautiful thing is that along the way, the media feels left out, right? And they come and tell the story. So I just think we've got to get back to humanity, right? We can't rely on media, and humanity is in the creation of that groundswell. I think the media comes after that.
Thanks. I'm going to read Doug's question. Alex Astrid, thank you for the questions. Thibault, and Doug, help me out if I'm butchering your question, but how would seawall not lead to gentrification and driving poor people out of the area? So Doug, I think what you're asking is, if you look back on any of the projects that might have gotten that press, is there anything you would have done differently?
Yeah, Doug, that's a great question. I love when people ask that. And in this little neighborhood that hadn't had any investment in, where we did our first teacher housing project, it couldn't have been more of a kumbaya development. But as a result of the success of the first project, another $100 million of development took place within a couple square blocks. And all of it, again, driven by the community, driven by the neighborhood, driven by the teachers and the nonprofits and the creation of like more small business. This ecosystem evolved. And I'll never forget Seawall's 10-year anniversary. We were at our strategic planning session, and I didn't know what was going to happen at this strategic planning session. Were we going to, the first 10 years we had done about $250 million of development. Were we going to talk about doing 500 million over the next 10 years? What was it going to look like? We asked everybody to come with one audacious idea to the meeting. not knowing what anybody's audacious idea was going to be. And the young woman that worked with us named Sean came and went first. And her audacious idea, she said, as a result of the work that we've done, gentrification and displacement are very real in this neighborhood. The unintended consequences of our success, as pure as our intentions were, are forcing people who want to live here to have to leave because they can no longer afford it. And again, this is one of these tipping point moments. One of two things could have happened. We could have said, it's too late. It's not really our fault. It's other landlords that are raising their price. We can't really control that. We're pure in our economics, but can't control the market. Or we can realize that it is 100% or 99% our fault that this gentrification and displacement has begun to happen, that it's not too late to address it, and that we can roll up our sleeves and try to understand, as the next wave of development happens, how can we make sure that we are aware of who are the most vulnerable citizens that might be displaced? How can development continue to happen with and for the community, not to them? And what are their priorities? How can we preserve affordable housing? How can we provide the wraparound services that all communities, mixed income communities, need to thrive and succeed together? So it's a question that we talk about often now. We're kind of at 15 years at this point. We're in the process of creating what we hope to become kind of the country's first inclusionary district, which kind of combines a lot of those thoughts into one cohesive plan. Again, as we move into other communities and as we're invited to do other development, I said this morning in the presentation too. In hindsight, right? If we would have known what was going to happen when we bought that old warehouse that everybody bet against us on, we would have just bought everything that was available in the community, right? You could have bought a home. They were selling shell homes for $1,000, for $1 at the time. And today a shell home in this neighborhood is $150,000. So that concept of affordability is gone. So we would have bought them all in a way, not to like make money and like take advantage of the situation, but in a way to make sure that every step of the way, the community was able to kind of like dictate and drive the affordability components and all of the other things that were important to them, and less displacement would have happened. Again, lessons learned in hindsight, and we're more aware as we go into other communities of how to start projects to limit that downside in the future.
Thanks to you, Doug. Thanks for the question. Ben Ferreira is one of the founders of the businesses that we work with, and he has a question.
Yeah, hey Thibault, great talk. Thanks so much for your time. I really wanted to ask, when you do get pulled into controversy, whether it's related to real estate developments or whatever it is, I imagine it's often with people who just have a completely different worldview or perspective from you. And in those cases, do you typically try to cut through directly to those adversarial kind of people who may be to your opposition and try to, explain your perspective and try to get them to see your position and join your side? Or do you just focus on building your own community?
Was it Ben?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Oh man, there's the entire third section of the book answers that specific question. So you have 7 chapters of an answer. I'm going to try to give it to you in a minute or two.
Sure.
There is controversy, and look, the larger your company gets, the more people create their own stories of what they think you are and who you and the values that you have. And I've realized that as Seawall's grown, that people this rumor on the street a few years ago was that Seawall was like $1 billion hedge fund out of New York City. Couldn't have been more further from the truth. So anytime that I hear of somebody like publicly speaking out against Seawall, I call them immediately. And a lot of times it takes many phone calls. I'll show up at your door, right, to have the conversation. I'll invite we'll eventually, after persistence, get a cup of coffee together. And I want to connect at a heart level, right? Like, I believe that, like, if you can do that as human beings, any divide can be bridged. And so usually I'll spend the first hour or two just listening to that person's story. And then if there's an opportunity, like, I'll share my story, right? I'll share a lot of the stories that I've shared with you guys today. My eternal quest to answer those burning questions of why are we so divided and what creative ways can bridge those divides, and all of the work that I've done throughout my career to answer those in a really authentic way. And it's great. Like, I'm able to learn about pieces that I've missed in the narrative, of mistakes that I've made and things that I can do different, of different perspectives and different ways of viewing the world and opportunities. I come out a lot of those deeply apologizing and understanding where my miss was. But most of them really end in a really kind of giant, powerful hug at the end of them. A mutual shared respect of sometimes just different perspectives that might never come together. But an appreciation of being able to connect on a face-to-face level as two human beings.
I gotta read the book. Ben and his team and everybody else has it in there on them. So Ben, that was an awesome question. It got to the love thing that I wanted to talk about.
Thanks so much, Thibault.
We talk about, I tell these guys how much I professionally love them all the time. TD Ready Commitment. We love you guys. Canmore, Castles Law. Thank you for making this happen. My babies Incubate North. I love you guys. Josh and Andy. I know Josh is on the call. Thank you for making all of this possible. Team INE, thank you. And Thibault, thank you so much. I feel like this could have been a lot longer. I love you. Thank you everybody for coming and joining. I don't know, any last words, bro? You like 30 seconds before you gotta go to your next thing.
No, I can't wait to get up to the Yukon and connect with you guys face to face. I've heard incredible things about all of you and the work that you guys are doing over there to move the needle. So never give up.
Thank you. Have an awesome end of the Friday, everybody, and weekend, and we appreciate you being with us. I guess that moves the chat.
Right.
I'm not going to